This is a reading from Meetings with Remarkable Men by G.I. Gurdjieff. And so I was living in New Bukhara, and this time I really began to work at making artificial paper flowers, to earn money and for various other advantages. In selling them, I was able to enter almost all the places of interest to me in Bukhara, and besides this, the income from this trade at that season of the year promised to be good. It was near the end of Lent, and, as is well known, the inhabitants of those places like to decorate their rooms and tables with flowers for the Easter holidays. Moreover, that year the Jewish and Christian Easter almost coincided, and, as the population of New Bukhara and part of Old Bukhara consisted mostly of people belonging to these two religions, the demand for artificial flowers was particularly great. I buckled down to work in real earnest, day and night, leaving only rarely to go and see my dervish friends, or occasionally on evenings when I was very tired, to play billiards at a nearby restaurant. In my youth I was very fond of this game and quite skilful at it. One night, the evening of Holy Thursday, having finished my work, I had gone to play billiards, when suddenly during the game I heard noise and shouting in the next room. Throwing down my cue, I ran in and saw 4 men beating up another one. Although I did not know these people at all, or what the trouble was about, I ran to the rescue of the one who was being attacked. In my youth, I used to be enthusiastic about Japanese jiu-jitsu and Hivanitzian Vizlezlu, and was always glad of an opportunity to apply my knowledge of these methods. So now also, just for the sport of it, I joined hotly in the fight, with the result that the two of us, the stranger and I, gave our opponents a good licking and soon forced them to retire. At that time, New Bukhara was still quite a new town. The population was made of haphazard elements, including many exiles from Russia living under the surveillance of the police on what were called wolf tickets. They were a motley crowd of people of all nationalities, some with a past, some perhaps with a future. Among them were criminals who had already served their terms, and also many political exiles, either sent there by the courts or by the administrative orders widely used at that time in Russia. The surroundings and conditions of life of these exiles were so wretched that all of them without exception gradually became drunkards. Even those who formerly never drank and had no hereditary predisposition to drink fell quite naturally and easily into this common tendency. The company in whose fight I had got mixed up belonged to this category. After the fight I wished to take my companion in arms to his home, fearing that if he went alone something unpleasant might happen to him on the way. But it turned out that he lived in the same place as the other 4, in repair cars on the railroad tracks. As it was already night, there was nothing to be done but suggest that he come home with me, to which he agreed. My new acquaintance, and this was Soloviev, turned out to be still a young man, but it was clear that he had already taken to drink. He had come out of the fight rather damaged. His face was all bruised and one eye badly blackened. The next morning his eye was swollen almost shut, and I persuaded him not to leave, but to stay with me until it was better, the more so since the Easter holidays had begun and he had finished work the day before. On Good Friday he went off somewhere, but came back to spend the night with me. The next day I had to run about almost all day long. I had to deliver the flowers ordered for Easter. I was not free until evening, and as I had no Christian acquaintances and nowhere to go to celebrate, I bought a gulich, pashka, some painted eggs, and everything else customary for this feast, as well as a small bottle of vodka, and brought them home. I did not find Soloviev in, and so after washing and making myself tidy, I had no other clothes to change into, I went off alone to the evening service at the church. When I returned, I found Soloviev already asleep. As there was no table in my room, I quietly, so as not to disturb him, brought in from the court outside a large empty case, covered it with a clean sheet, and placed on it all the things I had bought for the feast, and only then woke Soloviev. He was very surprised at everything he saw, and gladly consented to participate in this solemn repast. He got up and we sat down together at the table, he on my books and I on a pal turned upside down. First of all I poured out a glass of vodka for each of us, but to my astonishment he thanked me and refused to drink. I drank alone, and Soloviev began to eat. Philos, who was present at this celebration, received a double portion, 2 sheep's heads. We sat in silence and ate. It was not a happy Easter either for me or for Soloviev. Picturing to myself the familiar scene of the family feast, I began to think of my family far away. Soloviev also was thinking about something, and we sat a rather long time without speaking. All of a sudden, as if to himself, Soloviev exclaimed, "Help me, O Lord, in memory of this night, to be able never again to drink this poison which has brought me to such a life." He fell silent, and then with a disconsolate gesture murmured, "Ah me," and began telling me about his life. I do not know what had affected him. Was it because Easter recalled to him distant and dear memories of the time when he had been a man, or was it the sight of the carefully arranged table and the unexpected feast, or both together? Whatever it was, he poured his heart out to me. It seemed that Soloviev had once been a post office employee, but had become so quite by chance. He came from a merchant family of Samara, where his father owned big flour mills. His mother came of an impoverished noble family. She had been educated at a finishing school for the aristocracy, and her upbringing of her children consisted exclusively in teaching them good manners and how to behave. This was all they had been stuffed with. His father was hardly ever at home, spending his time at his mills and grain shops. Moreover, he was addicted to drink, and regularly several times a year he would drink steadily for several weeks. Even when sober he was, in the words of his son, an overbearing fool. The parents of Soloviev, each living their own separate lives and with their own interests, merely endured one another. Soloviev had one younger brother, and both boys went to the public school. The parents had even, as it were, divided up the children. The elder son was the mother's favourite, the younger the father's, and on this account there were frequent scenes. The father never addressed his elder son without a sneer, so that a kind of hostility gradually grew up between them. The mother, who received money from her husband for expenses, gave Soloviev a certain amount monthly. But with the years his appetites increased, and his allowance was not sufficient for paying court to girls. Once he stole a bracelet from his mother and sold it to make some gift or other. When she discovered this theft, she concealed it from his father, but the thefts began to be repeated, and one day his father, learning of them, made a great scene and turned Soloviev out of the house, although later, through the intervention of relatives and the mother, he pardoned him. Soloviev was in the 5th, or next to the highest class of the school, when a travelling circus stopped in Samaria, and he lost his head completely over a bareback rider named Verka. When the circus moved to Sitsin, Soloviev followed her there, having got hold of money in some fraudulent way from his mother. At this time he had already begun to drink. In Tsaritsyn he learned that his Veska had taken up with a captain of the mounted police, and out of bitterness he took to drinking heavily. He began to frequent the port taverns and found a great many companions like himself. It ended one fine day in everything being stolen from him while drunk, and he found himself in a strange town without a kopeck and not daring to send word of himself to his family. Having gradually sold his personal belongings and clothing, he was finally compelled to exchange even the clothes he was wearing for mere rags, and thus became an outcast in the full sense of the word. Hunger forced him to work in a fishery, and passing from one job to another, he finally came, in the company of other outcasts, to the town of Baku. Here fate smiled on him a little. Someone gave him clothes, and he succeeded in becoming a telephone operator in the district of Balakan. The adversities of his recent past made him think, and he began to work steadily. One day he met someone from Samara who, having learned who he was, that is, of what family he came, decided to get him a better position. As Soloviev had a fifth-class education, he was taken on in Baku as an assistant in the postal telegraph service, but for the first few months he had to work without a salary. After this he received a post in Kushka and worked there as a clerk. Thanks to his abstinence, he was able to dress decently and even saved a small sum of money. When he was 21, he received a notice from the military authorities that he was about to be called up for military service. This obliged him to return to his native town, and on arriving in Samaria he put up at a hotel and wrote to his mother. His mother, who had been receiving letters from him before this, was glad that her son had apparently turned over a new leaf and succeeded in obtaining his father's pardon for him. Soloviev was again received into the house, and his father, seeing that his son had come to his senses, was glad that things had turned out no worse and began to treat him well. On reporting to the military authorities, Soloviev drew a lot to serve, but being a telegraphist in the postal service, he had to wait several months for his appointment, since recruits of this category were appointed to vacancies by the central administration of the army. So he lived with his parents another 3 or 4 months before being ordered to a post with the railway battalion in charge of the Trans-Caspian Railway, which at that time was still militarized. When he arrived at his post and had done several weeks of compulsory service as a private soldier in the 2nd Company, he was assigned to what was called the Kushka line, but soon afterwards he fell ill with jaundice and was sent to the hospital at Merv, where his company was stationed. When he recovered, he was sent to the battalion headquarters at Samarkand and then to the military hospital there to be examined for his fitness for further military service. In the main building of the hospital in which Soloviev was placed, there was also a ward for prisoners. Walking along the corridor and occasionally talking with the prisoners through a little window, he made the acquaintance of one of them, a Pole who had been accused of counterfeiting. When Soloviev was given leave from service on account of poor health and discharged from the hospital, this prisoner asked him to take a letter to a friend of his who lived near the station in Samarkand. As thanks for delivering the letter, he stealthily handed him a vial of blue liquid, explaining that this liquid could be used to counterfeit the green 3-ruble notes, but not any other kind, and that this was done in the following way. Special paper, moistened with this liquid, was applied to both sides of the note, and then everything was pressed together in a book. The negatives obtained in this way from both sides of the note gave 3 or 4 good copies. In Central Asia, where people were not well acquainted with Russian money, these notes were very easy to pass. Soloviev, who first tried this process out of curiosity, found himself in need of money just before his departure for home, and with no particular risk passed a small quantity of his counterfeits. At home he was warmly welcomed, and his father urged him to stay and help him as the younger brother was doing. Soloviev consented and was given the direction of one of the mills somewhere outside Samara. But after working there several months he began to get bored and, longing for his vagabond life, went to his father and told him frankly that he could not go on any longer. His father let him go and even gave him a good deal of money. After this Soloviev went to Moscow and to St. Petersburg. Again took to drink, and finally arrived, drunk, in Warsaw. It was about a year after he had been given leave from military service. In Warsaw he was stopped on the street by a man who turned out to be the prisoner who had known him in the Samarkand hospital. It seemed he had been acquitted by the court and had come to Warsaw chiefly for paper and for a note-printing machine which he was expecting from Germany. He invited Soloviev to enter into partnership with him and help him in his work in Bukhara. Soloviev was tempted by this criminal but easy profit. He went to Bukhara to wait for his companion, but the Polish counterfeiter was delayed in Warsaw waiting for his machine. Soloviev continued to drink and, having squandered what was left of his money, got some job with the railway, where he had been working for 3 months before I met him, drinking incessantly all the while. Soloviev's frank story touched me deeply. At that time I already knew a great deal about hypnotism, and after bringing a man into a certain state, could influence him by suggestions to forget any undesirable habit. I therefore proposed to Soloviev that I should help him, if he really wished to get rid of his pernicious habit of drinking vodka, and explained to him how I would do it. He agreed, and the next day, and each day thereafter, I brought him into the hypnotic state and made the necessary suggestions. He gradually came to feel such an aversion to vodka that he could not even bear to look at this poison, as he called it. By this time Soloviev, having given up his railway work, had moved over to stay with me. He began to help me make the flowers, and sometimes took them to the market to sell.